What's up, guys? It's been quite a while, hasn't it? Alright, well, I'll admit to have not played a ton of Magic in the last maybe 2 or 3 months since I think I last posted something. I guess it was the 4 Horsemen videos. And the entire purpose of this video is to sort of try to explain why. And I actually picked this game because it's sort of a pretty succinct summary of my frustrations with the format in general, particularly the 1v1 format, and overall a lack of curation for Commander in general. And it's kind of interesting, actually. The reason why I decided to make this video today is because I actually just had a conversation with Sheldon Menery, I think, what was it, 2 nights ago? We finally got around to chatting. I ran into him. I actually texted him a couple years ago, and he actually seemed pretty receptive to having a conversation about the state of the format and even inviting or entertaining my notions about shaking up the format a little bit. Said that he was interested in having a talk about that. And we finally got to have that conversation a couple days ago. And I got to say that I was a little disappointed with the outcome of it. I haven't given up yet, but what Sheldon basically explained to me, as best as I can summarize it, and anybody who's read the Commander Manifesto, read the Discord chats, whatever, about the kind of modern state of the format, probably knows this already. But for those who aren't as much in the know about it, essentially, Sheldon's thesis is that the format was made exclusively for multiplayer. And in fact, was not just made for multiplayer, but was actually made as kind of a direct counter to tournament play. And it kind of made sense 15 years ago, I think, when Sheldon and his group of guys started working on Commander format. And I think back then his central argument that more casual players were underserved by both card design and by organized tournament play. And so he and his friends got together and they made a tournament format for themselves, basically, that was kind of the antithesis of the competitive scene. And it was 4-player and had 40 life and was casual, and it was singleton and invited a lot of creativity and slow, grindy games, kind of described as battlecruiser magic and stuff. And I think that certainly Sheldon's argument and the general ethos of that format really applied to, 2000, what would have been 15 years ago. Quite a while, like 2008, 2007. I'm not exactly sure when Commander first started up, but clearly the format has changed and shifted and evolved a ton. In fact, even in the last 5 or 6 years, it's changed a lot. It's definitely very different from the format that I started playing about a dozen years ago. I'm not sure exactly when I started, but I guess you could probably tell by my Commander videos. The point is that the idea that the Commander population is underserved relative to attention that Wizards spends to both developing Magic products and to organizing events or kind of giving people an opportunity to play the format live is kind of absurd at this point, actually, because I think that anybody out there who plays Commander probably mirrors my own experience, that if you walk into a shop nowadays, the odds that you find anybody not playing Commander seem like about zero, unless it's a tournament. Maybe a Friday night Magic day, people might be playing Draft or some sort of limited format. Obviously, at pre-releases, it's different. But in terms of casual play, people really only play, with paper cards, they're really only playing Commander. And not just that, but it seems that a huge amount of development attention is focused on the format, which of course makes sense because it's so popular. And if you're going to be monetizing your physical card game, then creating entire sets devoted to Commander and paying a lot of attention to it sort of seems like the best way to profit. And I think that Hasbro just reported their biggest profits, their annual profits. They actually sold over $1 billion worth of Magic cards, probably digitally and physically, in the last year. And I'm sure that Commander comprised a huge percentage of that total gross sales. So the idea that the format exists to service an underserved population in Magic space doesn't really make any sense to me anymore. And so I tried to sort of make that point in my conversation with Sheldon. He was very adamant about it, though, and also adamant about the idea that they did not make changes to the multiplayer ban list to do any sort of concessions to the more competitive 1v1 players and just sort of the spikes in the game in general. And he was really, really just totally clear about that and seemed quite inflexible about it. And while I do understand the sentiment, I just think that for players like me who are more competitive, or in my case, tournament players who have gravitated over to Commander, not because they want to flex their competitive chops, but more because they want to have an experience where winning is the chief objective. And that's, obviously that's the Spike sentiment summarized, that Spike style players who have an entire subset of Magic cards in every set designed specifically for them. But Spike is basically concerned with just winning a game of Magic, and he doesn't really care how he achieves that. The goal is just to win, and that's certainly my chief sentiment. But the bulk of people who probably play Commander, certainly the more casual players, fall into the Johnny or Timmy category. Johnny being the player who enjoys winning, and certainly winning is the goal, but Johnny always wants to win on his own terms, which means he's not net decking. He's playing with his own little pet cards and stuff, and he really enjoys the admiration and recognition of winning through his own ingenuity and so on, rather than just copying a deck list. And then, of course, the Timmy player is the player who just kind of wants to do big and flashy things, and as long as he gets to do the big and flashy things periodically, he doesn't really care that much about winning. It's definitely not the goal. So most Commander players fall into the Timmy and Johnny category, but there are a lot of Spike players, particularly because if you go to a shop and you want to play with physical cards, it's really, really hard to find casual games of anything but Commander, which means that if you're like me and you enjoy playing competitive games where you actually care about the outcome quite a bit, you don't really have any options but to play Commander. And it's felt increasingly in the last 5 or 6 years that the rules committee is kind of ignoring players like me. And I'm sure that there are many players who feel the same way that I do who watch this channel. Raise your hand if you're out there right now, and I'd love to hear your individual comments about what I'm saying. But we are actually kind of steadily becoming the underserved population in this environment. And it was really evident to me in my conversation with Sheldon that the rules committee just simply does not care about our perspective at all. They don't care about our game experience, despite the fact that it's explicitly stated in the manifesto for Commander. I don't have it on hand right away, but if I were to paraphrase, it's something to the effect of, we want to be an inclusive community that respects players of all abilities and all sentiments. And it really doesn't seem like that's really happening. And the game that I'm about to show you is a nice summary of that. And I think that in general, the format has a bunch of really toxic stuff in it right now that's really degrading and undermining the experience of people who want to have competitive games of Commander that kind of still capture the feel of the format, where it's a long back and forth. You get to do a lot of cool stuff. There's a lot of decision making and so on. It's the kind of things that attracted me to the format in the first place, and that's sort of the thing that I've been featuring on this channel since I started producing videos for it many, many years ago. And as time has gone by and the games have sped up increasingly and felt increasingly non-interactive, and Nate and I have worked really, really hard to develop some decks that are able to interact even without the color blue, which, obviously you play enough blue decks for enough years, you can kind of get tired of the basic strategy of just playing lands and countering things and so on. And it's fun to challenge yourself to try to be interactive using non-blue spells. Bullszat, which I've got right in front of me, I already did a deck tech about this deck, is kind of the best example of that. I think this deck is absolutely, it's an S tier deck, competitive with the very, very best of all the decks in the format. But by nature of being black and red and having a limited amount of interaction and no counterspells, you have to fall back onto discard and mana destruction to really kind of achieve the same goal. And that game plan works quite well, but you're always kind of just at the mercy of the draw. And there are just a couple of extremely compact and really, in my estimation, overpowered combos that are available in Commander that make playing anything but blue kind of frustrating if you're playing any type of competitive Magic. And normally when you have things like that really degrade the play experience of players and give players the ability to win the game without really thinking much and with very little challenge and very little resistance or interaction, those are kind of, historically at least, the cards that are candidates for banning. And they're not doing that right now. Probably the chief offender, obviously, is Thesis Oracle, and Thesis Oracle has been just sort of running roughshod over Commander for years. But apparently it's not a big deal, and it's not showing up in casual games. And as far as Sheldon is concerned, if Thesis Oracle isn't showing up and bleeding its way from the competitive corners of the format into more casual games, they have no intention of doing anything about it, even if it's totally degrading and ruining the experience of players who are more serious. And that's a fundamental problem. I'm not giving up on it. I intend to have a follow-up conversation with him and see if I can change his mind. So far, no success at that. He has definitely dug in his heels and has a very, very specific idea about how he wants the format to look. I do respect that, and I understand it. It is fundamentally Sheldon's format, but it is also a format that thousands and thousands of competitive players play and enjoy, either in multiplayer as a 1v1 thing. And I think those players do matter, and I think that their voice and perspectives should be heard and respected as well. particularly if you want to adhere to the general idea of the format that we're supposed to be playing and including players from all walks of life and all interests, all the Spikes, Johnnies, and Timmies of the world. But anyway, I've said enough for now. I'm going to get to this game. I'm up against this guy, Juyem, and of course, I see Thrasios, Tevesh. This is obviously top tier competitive thing. This is probably either Tevesh Zat and Thrasios, or Tevesh Zat and Crown, probably the two best ways to run Tevesh Zat if you're not running the black-red archetype as I am. And I know, of course, obviously, if I see this three-color combo, that he's certainly running, at a minimum, the fastest Oracle combo, and probably some other things too, although he doesn't have red, so he doesn't have the Underworld Breach thing. I'm looking at my opening hand. I think I'm going first this game, although I'm not positive. And despite the fact that I have Vandal Blast in my opening hand, the rest of my hand is terrible, so I have to, of course, throw it back. So I'm going to mulligan into this hand. Very, very good hand. Winnow Orb's a little clunky, but I do have turn 1 Dark Confidant off the Mox Amber and my Rogue Ra, as well as Urza Saga. It's just a pretty damn good hand overall. And of course, I'm going to keep this in a second. After some thought, maybe it was wrong to keep Deadly Rollick just because it doesn't really work against Thrasios, and you're not really too concerned about killing Thrasios. And since it only costs 2, they can just replay it anyway. But I don't really know what he's playing, and there might be some other nasty things. I guess he doesn't have access to something like Dranith Magistrate, which is another card you really want to keep Rollick against. But I think ultimately I decided to throw back the Winnow Orb just because it's the least useful card in my hand. I'm going to kick this off here. Yes, it looks like he's going to go turn 1, Verdant Catacombs, Mox Diamond, discarding Yavimaya, the Cradle thing, and Arcane Signets. He's got 3 mana on turn 1. Totally fine, and he's got a Ponder as well. This is sort of kind of what you expect in this format. Just there are so many accelerators now, and things like Mox Amber and Gilded Lotus or Jeweled Lotus have been printed recently to just accelerate the format even more and more free spells and stuff, and just feeling a lot like Vintage. But at least I have a good sort of Vintage style hand here as well. Despite the mulligan, Curse of Opulence, that's very nice as well. So I'm going to play the Blackcleave Cliffs, play Rogue Ra, run up the Mox, and cast Dark Confidant. Really wish I'd gone first here. It would have been just such a better turn because I'd get at least one card off the Confidant at a minimum. All right, let's see what's going on here. He's already 80% of the way to casting Tevesh Zat. And he's seen casting some mana. He casts Chromatic Lantern. A bit strange to see that. I got to tell you, it's very annoying playing a black-red deck that runs something upwards of 12 artifact removal spells and just not having one in my opening hand to deal with this kind of shenanigans. But he's giving me at least a land. I do have a couple of basic lands in my deck, and I'll actually take a look here. I did my deck tech a little while ago. Bullszat hasn't changed a ton since then. I actually had to remove Jeweled Lotus for about 3 weeks or maybe even a month because it was bugged and you couldn't spend the mana on anything. Just go into your mana pool and you couldn't do anything with it. But the major changes that have actually been made to this deck, if I can summarize them, Guild Artisan is in the deck now. Very, very, very powerful card in this archetype. Just making 2 mana a turn is just incredible. Honor-Worn Shaku. This was a card that Nate kind of came across and started running, and anyone who's playing Bullszat recognizes that this card is often comparable to Gilded Lotus in power level, and it only costs 3 because you can tap any legendary permanent, including Rogue Ra and Tevesh Zat itself, and there are a number of other legendary permanents in the deck, and it's very, very common for Honor-Worn Shaku to be making 2 to 3 mana a turn, and that's pretty damn good for a 3 mana artifact. Got the Goldspan Dragon in here. This was a card suggested by a friend of mine named Eric, although I think Nate may have played it first. And Goldspan is in here mainly because it gives you some extra Planeswalker interactions. The Flying Haste thing is great, and it does produce mana as well, and allows you to produce double mana out of treasures and stuff that you might produce through the other cards like Guild Artisan and Curse of Opulence and stuff. So kind of just solves some problems. The Goldspan Dragon is a very specific card in the deck. Obviously, there are other 5 mana 4/4 or I think even 5/5 hasted dragons, but the extra mana production from Goldspan really makes it a lot better. Every time it attacks, you get two mana, almost 2/3 of a Black Lotus, which is pretty damn good. And as far as other things, the other final additions are Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast, which I kind of reluctantly put in the deck. I don't like the fact that, obviously they're narrow against against non-blue strategies, and we don't have a lot of ways to cycle or discard cards. But I think that having this kind of interaction, one of the ways that Bullszat tends to lose against decks with a lot of devoted counter magic is they just sit there with 2 or 3 blue mana untapped all the time. You can't really just run your commander out into a counter spell because it'll make it cost prohibitive amounts of mana. And the deck can stall out sometimes if you're not able to get Tevesh that running. So having Pyro and Red Elemental Blast helps you push the commander through. And of course, they obviously have the interaction with Thassa's Oracle, one of the few ways to stop that creature from killing you. I'm just going to go grab a swamp here. So got plenty of mana. He only has 1 card in hand, so that's a good thing at least. But he is 1 turn away from casting Tevesh that. And I really need to draw some artifact kill right now. Hopefully I can get some. That's just an artifact. So I'm going to play the Urza Saga here and cast Curse of Opulence. Attack to get a gold token. And then, of course, I'm just going to cast the Thran Dynamo here. So he's going to have free reign to cast his commander. I can't do anything to stop it. Didn't draw any artifact kill. It would have been so nice to have just 1 piece. You can just see 1 piece of artifact kill. And we run a million Shatterstorms in this deck. It has By Force, Fiery Confluence, Shattering Spree, Vandal Blast. Obviously, I couldn't cast Vandal Blast quite yet, but tons and tons of ways to mass destroy artifacts to rein in these kind of starts. But unfortunately, he gets up to Tevesh that and he makes 2 1/1s. Or 2 0/1s. He does have only 2 cards in hand, so I'm not terribly worried yet. Not until he starts to draw more cards. And I draw Duress. That's quite awesome. So I'm just gonna attack here first for a token. Duress. Oh yeah, and I saw, of course, this fucking thing, Thassa's Oracle, and I can't take that since it's just Duress. And I take Cyclonic Rift out of his hand, but he's down to just an Oracle in hand, which is pretty badass. So now, thanks to Thran Dynamo's ramping ability, I can run out my own Tevesh Zat and sack Rogra. Draw 3. Excellent. 2 artifact kill spells and Goldspan Dragon. This is sort of the exact reason why we run the Goldspan Dragon in the deck, because next turn I can fly over with Goldspan, take a huge bite out of Tevesh Zat's loyalty, create a gold token, and then both of these gold tokens make 2 mana each, and I can blow all of his artifacts to hell, and he'll be down to just 2 mana, and the game will basically be in the bag, even though he's got the Tevesh Zat in play. What are the odds that he can actually rally and deal with the Goldspan plus my active Tevesh Zat? All right, so I have some thoughts here. I can just simply recast Rogra, but I realized the danger here, the endemic danger of him having Thassa's Oracle in hand already and the ability to draw 3 cards next turn, which means that if he draws into a tutor, I can die if he has 5 mana in play, and there's a lot of tutors in the deck. So with that in mind, I decided that as much as I would like to just redeploy Rogra, or maybe even make an artifact creature off of the Urza Saga, so that I can have a 4/4 to attack and start pressuring the Tevesh Zat and force him to block with Thralls, I decided that I need to cast By Force right now. And unfortunately, I only have 2 additional mana, so I can't shatter all 3 of the blue mana producers. But I can drop him down to just an Underground Sea and a Llanowar Waste and 1 mana source. And that should at least hold him off long enough to buy me enough time to break the other things and start attacking with the dragon. Let's see what happens. All right, he's up to 2 cards in hand. All right, he sacks a Thrall and draws 2. He's only got 3 mana. Oh look, Thassa's Oracle. Stack it. Demonic Consultation. I even have Deadly Rollick in hand, but unfortunately that doesn't do shit against Thassa's Oracle because of the way that it's designed and the way the triggers work. And I'm dead just like that. And this kind of shit just is so stupid and pointless to have in a format that isn't supposed to be like Vintage and Legacy. And I understand that they don't want to curate the format to appeal to competitive players. But the thing is that any person who's playing this format now, if they care at all about the outcome of the game, I guess, if they care about long and interactive games, this fucking menacing bullshit is just always here. And it doesn't make the game better in any way. It's not like it's hard to go and just top deck Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact when you have an Oracle in your hand or one of the many tutors that does it. The fact that this interaction also kills an entire table of players is ridiculous. And one of the things that I said to Sheldon when I was talking about actually the fundamental problem, as much as Thassa's Oracle seems like the boogeyman, the true problem with the interaction is Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact. I think that these 2 cards, if I was going to ban anything, I would ban Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact, mainly because, particularly with Demonic Consultation, the card only exists for abuse cases. You're only going to be playing with Demonic Consultation in your deck when you're intending to win the game via decking yourself with it. because there's a couple of other things. There's that other Jason stuff. There's Laboratory Maniac. And basically, for all future card design, as long as Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact are in the format, any card that they make that allows you to win when you have no cards in your deck is going to be very, very problematic for every person's experience. And it was funny when I talked about Demonic Consultation, Sheldon said that he had never had anybody cast it against him ever in a game of Commander in his entire career playing Commander, stretching back 15 years, which is probably not true, but I found rather a remarkable statement. And I also said to him immediately that that was further evidence of the fact that they should just ban the card then, because if there's no downside to banning the card, if they were to ban Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact, my suspicion is that most casual players would not even know what either of those cards did. They might have to look them up to find out, but if the cards are not being played in multiplayer and they're not a problem, then the casual players, the Timmies and Johnnies, don't even know what these cards are. So if they get banned, they're just going to go, huh, that's interesting. Oh, I wonder what that's for, and they'll move on. The only people that this affects are the people who are more competitive players. And I think almost universally, most competitive players would breathe a collective sigh of relief if Consult and Pact were removed from the game. Because whether or not you're using them or not, having these things in the format that can just insta one-shot you out of nowhere for only 3 or 4 mana is just dumb. It's just not why we play Commander, and it doesn't even really make sense to have it there. So if it won't bother the casual players and it makes literally one net competitive player happy, then for the sake of the format, banning both of them makes perfect sense. And it's very hard to formulate an argument against that. Sheldon also made the point that they're concerned about banned list bloat, as he described it to me, that too many cards are on the ban list and it can be confusing and daunting to new players. But I don't buy that argument either, because the ban list is filled with all sorts of extremely antiquated cards that nobody would put in a deck now in 2023, even if they were unbanned. If they unbanned Worldfire or Biorhythm or Coalition Victory or any number of these old, antiquated, shitty cards, if they unbanned any of those, nobody would put them in a deck, because we're not playing the format that existed 15 years ago. They would not be played by anybody. So they could just unban a dozen cards that are on the banned list if they're worried about banned list bloat, and replace 3 or 4 of those cards with some of the biggest outliers and offenders in current Commander format. And the format would be better for everybody involved, and Sheldon just won't do it. The other thing that he said to me too was that they don't ban cards out of consideration for the 1v1 experience, but that's not objectively true either. I asked him why Fast Bond is banned, for example, and he would not explain it to me. He wouldn't justify why Fast Bond is banned. I don't imagine if you unban Fast Bond that it would be running roughshod over every single casual table and ruining games. I think that the average player who plays Commander probably doesn't understand that Fast Bond is a good card at all, and it really isn't that great of a card unless it's paired with the wheel effects in the format anyway, which I imagine a lot of the casual players don't play anyway, because Time Twister costs $1 million, so does Wheel of Fortune, there's cards like Windfall and stuff. But overall, I don't think that hardly anybody would play with Fast Bond, yet it's on the banned list anyway, clearly as a consideration for 1v1 or more competitive games. And the same thing is true for Gifts Ungiven, and a handful of other cards are also on the banned list. So there is a precedent for removing things that are problematic in the more competitive experience, and yet they won't lift a finger about Consult and Pact. And that, my friends, is why I have lost interest, for the most part, in playing Commander, because I am just so sick of this shit. It's just not fun to play against it. I hate the idea that my opponent can do exactly what happened here. He can basically get a decent draw and luck sack his way into a card that kills me with no ability for my black-red deck to interact. That is just toxic and terrible for the format, and I'm sorry we all have to contend with it. I'm not going to give up. I'm still going to be making my case to Sheldon. I'm going to actually try to get onto the Commander Rules Committee if that's possible. But I have some other ideas down the road, and that is the chief reason why I haven't been making a lot of Commander videos recently. I really lost a lot of interest in the format because I'm just sick of toxic bullshit, and I'm sure plenty of other people out there who enjoy the format in a more competitive way, including people who watch this channel, probably feel the same way. So that's it for this game, guys. That's a big L for me, and I've got another game coming up here I'll record in just a bit. Thanks for watching and for hearing me rant and complain about this sort of thing, and I will see you next time. Take care.